So I think we're going to get through more of the video today because I set up everything in a real rush and I've probably made it all not work. No, hopefully it's okay. Just a quick thing, because a while ago I mentioned having a thing I was anxious about, which was having a swollen tonsil. And I never actually provided an update on that. And I thought it would be useful for Patreon that I do provide an update on that, which is basically that it turns out that that's just what my tonsils look like, which is interesting. I mean, it definitely coheres with the fact that every now and then I've looked again and they've not changed at all. So it's like, yeah, but I don't know. To me, they look lumpier than I would expect them to be. Right now, I've got a whole, like, the reason I was thinking about it is because I've got a whole other thing going on. It's not, I've got a weird thing going on. I'll tell you now just because it's vaguely weird. In my left ear, I'm just getting a kind of, what it sounds like is my eardrum popping in and out a tiny bit frequently. Kind of sporadically, but every now and then, just like I'd almost call it a crackling, but a kind of like a low rumbly crackling. The one massive annoying thing about it though is that it's been interfering with my sleep. I don't know if it's actually been waking me up because, like I said, it's not very loud. It's like a very, very subtle. But I think what it is it seems to be worse when I'm lying down. So if I do wake up in the middle of the night, then I'm immediately aware of it, and then I struggle to get back to sleep. So I think that's the issue. Like the most obvious explanation would be some kind of like congestion thing where it's sort of like my sinuses, and that's like, I don't know, anyway. It might affect the way I behave, I don't know, on camera, just because you got to know in the back of my mind, I've got this whole ear thing going on that I'm kind of aware of.
These trans people to be. So
yeah, okay, am I even going to introduce the video? Basically, we've been responding to this response to me. We've done 2 responses so far and we're half an hour through. I'm wanting to make sure we get, God, I want to get, I don't know, I want to get like some way through it, but we'll see. Okay, let's try this.
But from the data I've seen, and which was cited in the video made by Powered by Rainbows, the side effects are mild, and they don't affect even most trans people who undergo it. If you're claiming that these side effects are quite serious and are being experienced in huge numbers, then you must provide evidence. Another claim he makes.
Okay, so that's actually basically talking about side effects of transition, and there he says, actually, these physical side effects aren't that common. I don't think that's really important though, because the main point I'm making obviously is, well, do you know what the physical side effects are of just accepting your biological sex as it is? There are none. So if there are any physical side effects from wrong sex hormones, then that's worse than what I'm suggesting.
If trans people just stop all of a sudden identifying as trans, will their mental health just suddenly improve? If King Critical thinks this, then once again, evidence is required.
Okay, so basically, I said that believing yourself to be a woman when you're a biological male, which is what trans identity is, causes negative mental health effects. And then he says, well, if they stop doing that, would their mental health suddenly improve? And the answer to that is, I think it would improve, but not suddenly. Why? Well, it's good that I started this video off talking about my mental health issues when it comes to health anxiety, right? Because I believe the only way to actually improve your mental health, if you have any mental health issue, is at least in some way to push back against it. And in my case, that involves things like not Googling symptoms, not avoiding wanting to find out loads about any symptom you have and just accepting the fact it's probably nothing. If you are the type of person who can strongly feel you are a woman, despite being biologically male, but then you can just say, no, actually, I'm not a woman. I accept that I'm not a woman. I realize I'm not a woman. I realize I'll never be a woman, and that's fine. Then you are almost guaranteed to be the kind of person who is going to be far more resilient to mental health issues. If you're the kind of person who says, well, I feel like a woman and I'd feel really bad if I wasn't a woman, so I'm just going to accept I'm a woman. Well, when you're depressed or anxious, how do you think you're going to have the mental strength to push back against that if you couldn't even push back against your mental feelings when they were objectively wrong about reality. So no, yeah, I do think it's not immediate. It's not like, oh, I've stopped identifying as trans, now I'm fine. But definitely, I think people who stop identifying as trans will, in the long term, have better mental health outcomes. And certainly most detransitioners I've spoken to always talk about how part of detransitioning involved undertaking certain good lifestyle practices that are good for mental health. So yeah, I'm fine saying that.
The burden of proof isn't on me to show that medical transition is an uncomplicated good, as I don't even claim it to be an uncomplicated good. I acknowledge that there are some rare side effects which are no...
Okay, the issue is, so he's saying that I didn't claim it was an uncomplicated good. Here's the problem though. He has been, in this video so far, incredibly resistant to me saying, well, let's pursue a big change in society where we change our entire societal attitude towards gender, because that's a better solution I would expect. And he's really resistant to that. But if you're admitting that accepting trans identity as valid is not actually an uncomplicated good, then I think at that point you completely abandon any logic to saying, you know, how dare you suggest that we should actually just change the way we as society think. Unless you have a really good solution to a problem, you can't get mad at people suggesting a different solution. And if the different solution is a solution that, you know, is not something that you can just do kind of casually, but is something that we would need to work towards, like fundamentally changing the way you think about gender, then you can't just say, well, you haven't provided any peer-reviewed studies to show your method work. Well, you can't provide a peer-reviewed study of what would happen if we fundamentally change society's ideas about gender, because you can't just casually in a laboratory setting fundamentally change society's attitude towards gender and raise people in that society. But I do suspect that would be the better thing to do.
The burden of proof is on him to show that the negative side effects outweigh the massive positive effects. If doctors prescribe medical transitions...
Again, the question is that relative to what, right? If changing society was completely off the table, then yeah, I think maybe... So like, wait, what are the options? Tell people to medically transition or don't. Then I guess maybe telling them to medically transition is the best thing for their individual mental health. That still doesn't mean it's accurate as a statement about reality, saying that transition is valid, but maybe it's best for their mental health. That's fine. I don't have to say that that is an overall negative for the individual's health. What I can say, though, is that relative to other things, I think it's worse. And I would say that even if you ignore, like, changing people's attitudes or changing societal attitudes in general, I do think individuals can, and this is what detransitioners do, can show the overall positive effects of pushing back against trans identity and accepting their biological sex as it is. The issue is that such people are very unique in having that ability, because as a society, we do make that difficult for people because of a lot of the societal sickness around our attitude towards mental health and things like that, and gender, and just in general the way life is. There are trans-identified people who then become detransitioned, and that they're able to do that and able to make all the lifestyle choices that are good for their mental health is really commendable. But obviously that's not something that can be expected of everybody. I would make a similar comparison to the idea of like social mobility, where obviously anybody can work really hard and become upwardly socially mobile, but we don't live in a society that you can say by any means facilitates that. A lot of society is about entrenching inequalities. So that would be a good analogy. But no, yeah, I'm not saying that trans identity relative to, I guess, what, doing nothing is worse. I'm saying potentially trans identity is worse in terms of being, you know, not as good as it is bad. And again, this is just talking about, never mind the effects it has on women and children and all those kind of things that, like the kind of collateral damage, if you like, of trans identity. I'm just talking about specifically the trans-identified individuals themselves. I think maybe for an individual trans-identified person, they could make lifestyle changes and basically, do the standard lifestyle things. I know I repeat them all the time, but like hydration, regular sleeping schedule, healthy diet, regular exercise, avoiding too much time with screens, not doom scrolling social media, just things like that, which I think are good for people. If a detransitioned person does those, and never mind if there are detransitioned people who have done those things and turn their life around in a really positive way, and they have seen the positive effects, then 100% those people's lives are better than if they just continued with transition. Guaranteed. And they don't have any of the negative physical side effects, or at least they'll, if they have any, then those will be negative physical side effects that would have only been more pronounced if they continued with the transition. But if they got out of it early enough, they might have no negative physical side effects. And indeed, actually, the things they're doing are good for their health, like exercise and regular sleeping pattern and hydration and so on and so forth. But then that's not even getting into the other question of, well, what if we fundamentally rechange society? Rechange? That's change. I was going to say like reformed or whatever, and I combined it with change to get rechange. What if we completely changed society so that we facilitated people having this healthier attitude towards mental health? You'd be talking about a massive change there, and a massive positive change, and a change that would blow the mixed benefits, and that's being generous, of trans identity completely out the water.
Following this, King Critical responds to my argument that intersex people exist, and they aren't just males or females with
Okay, so now we're on to a different thing. That I decided, so there was some stuff towards the end there that I could have responded to, but I felt like I would have been repeating myself, and I do think I need to become a bit more like, not, I can respond to this, so I will. So we're now, I think, in the interest of actually like finishing this, going to get to a point where there's going to be stuff that's said where I could respond to it, but if I don't think it's massively important, I'm going to not respond to it. But we'll see what I have to say about intersex people existing.
This is a misunderstanding of how definitions work. It's an equivocation of what King Critical means by male and what scientists mean by male.
Okay, I'm interested to see where this is going.
If you have both testicular and ovarian tissue, then by the definition of hermaphrodite being a person who has both testicular and ovarian tissue, you cannot be a totally...
Wait, what? Yeah, so he's saying like, so I'm saying like basically if I'm me and I'm completely biologically male, like obviously I'm biologically male, my, as I define it, my phenotype is organized around facilitating the function of the small gamete in sexual reproduction, and that's definitely what my body is. If I have a random bit of ovarian tissue tucked away somewhere, does that make me a hermaphrodite? And my argument would be, no, that's complete nonsense. If I look like a biological male and I can perform the reproductive function of a biological male, then to say that I am hermaphrodite just because I have one bit of ovarian tissue somewhere as like a genetic abnormality or whatever, physical abnormality, tucked away doing nothing, to say that makes me an hermaphrodite is complete nonsense. And what this guy's saying, seemingly, I mean, just based on that comment there is, well, you are an hermaphrodite based on the definition of an hermaphrodite as someone who has both ovarian tissue and testicular tissue. What I'm saying is, well, that's a stupid definition then, if it would carry with it the implication that someone who's obviously, in fact, biologically male and completely fulfills the function of biological males in sexual reproduction is an hermaphrodite. An hermaphrodite? That's a funny way of saying it. Just because they have that.
Biological male. Now, King Critical might be able to find other scientific definitions of male and female which might be different, and that's fine, but he'd still be wrong in saying that someone can't be both male and female.
Wait, what?
AKA intersex, in respect to the most common definitions used by researchers.
Okay, hold a minute. So he's saying that the most common definition used by researchers is if you have testicular tissue, you're a biological male. If you have ovarian tissue, you're a biological female. And if you have both, then you are automatically an hermaphrodite. Because that is, I keep wanting to say an hermaphrodite, which is weird because I realize I'm saying it with a huh. Like, I'm not saying like an hermaphrodite. I'm saying, but whatever. Anyway, I think I do that sometimes, like an historical account. Anyway, so I'm just going to keep doing it, whatever. An hermaphrodite. That sounds normal to me. Even though, technically speaking, I know that usually if you start a sentence with a consonant, or start a word with a consonant, you don't say the word preceding it as an, you'd say it as a. But it sounds normal to me, an hermaphrodite. Even though it also sounds weird. But so does a hermaphrodite. A hermaphrodite. Anyway, sorry. The point is, I don't know anyone who upholds that definition, and this doesn't even seem to be the common trans argument or like trans science argument. Because usually what they'll say is, well, sex is defined in all sorts of different ways. Like, it's defined with reference to chromosomes and genitals and gonads and hormones and secondary sex characteristics, which is always, it's kind of a dishonest argument, or it's an argument that fundamentally goes against what sex is, which is actually an holistic thing. Yeah, I don't know, like this idea of the scientific definition of sex is just, well, if you have ovarian tissue, you're a woman. If you have, or a female, you know, that definition where it's completely about what gonadal tissues do you have is a definition I'm not familiar with, and I can't be bothered to really delve into it, because obviously we're trying to get through this video quite quickly. But I mean, if there's not any more substance provided there, then this seems like kind of a pointless thing to say, because it's just like, well, that just sounds like a nonsense definition to me.
If you have several eye colors, then you clearly must have heterochromia, regardless of how you feel about it, or how obvious you say it is that you only have one eye color.
It's interesting that this guy's going down the, it doesn't matter how you feel about it, like science is science. The thing is, it's weird, because it's funny because this guy seems to be presenting an unwillingness to engage with the idea that scientific definitions can be wrong or inaccurate. Scientists used to think Pluto was a planet, and then they realized that doesn't really make much sense because it leads to wildly counterintuitive conclusions. You know, and I've spoken before about Pluto being a planet. You know, this guy's doing his, let me give you my perfect analogy around heterochromia. And basically his analogy is, well, heterochromia is literally defined this way. So if you fit that definition, you literally have heterochromia. And he's saying, well, also being a hermaphrodite is defined this way. So if you fit this definition, you're automatically an hermaphrodite. My analogy I would make, and I like making this analogy, is to the idea of Pluto being a planet. Basically, you come to counterintuitive conclusions, like the idea that even though Pluto was surrounded by loads of other small rocky objects, like other asteroids basically, that we say Pluto's a planet, even though it's pretty much identical to all the other things around it. Well, you have a similar issue here, which is if you say it's just about testicular or, basically your gonadal tissue, then you can find yourself in a situation where you're saying that somebody is an hermaphrodite, even though they're basically identical to every other biological male around them. They just have a tiny bit of ovarian tissue. So again, you come to a radically counterintuitive conclusion. When scientists did that about Pluto, they realized, well, I guess Pluto is not a planet because we can't have this counterintuitive conclusion. So they changed the definition. I'm arguing if they have that definition now, it's a definition they should change.
If people who do research on this topic find that these definitions of sex are useful, what exactly is the argument for not doing so?
Okay, he says, people find these definitions of sex are useful. I don't think they do. I don't believe they do. I think that one of the problems is that the way that definitions should work is actually a philosophical concept, and therefore you run the risk of scientists not actually realizing the implication of what it means for a definition to be accurate. So I think you might get scientists who say, basically, because in some way objects are, or states of being are defined with reference to these particular attributes, those must mean that those attributes are definitional to what it means to be that thing. They might not fully be thinking through the implication of that and realizing, like I say, the obvious counterintuitive definitions that could lead them to. But again, going back to Pluto, people used to think that understanding Pluto as a planet was helpful. And now they realize it's not helpful, and it leads to counterintuitive conclusions.
Some fungi produce gametes which are of the same size and have thousands of different sexual identities, which aren't as simple as being male or female or being organized around.
Okay, that seems like maybe that is just a pretty basic L for me. I said that all species that reproduce sexually reproduce with two... Oh, hello, I got a noise. That's fine, though. All species that reproduce sexually reproduce with two sexes. And he's saying, no, actually, there are some species that reproduce sexually that reproduce with more than two sex categories. Obviously, the more defensible argument, in that everyone knows this is true, is that mammals are always binary sexually.
If you're interested in learning about stuff like this, make sure to check out Forrest Valkai's video called Sex and Sensibility. It has a lot of great information on this topic.
That video is bad, like plenty of people have. In fact, I would say if you were interested in learning about why that's wrong, you should check out, the Paradox Institute's video, where they go really, like, the video is like 4 hours long, going through everything he says, breaking it all down in a lot of detail, which is, definitely worth them doing, because they actually do know a lot about the specific kind of biological aspect of sex.
There are clearly people who fit both the definition of male and female, and therefore are actually hermaphrodites, and these people are able to...
It's literally impossible to fit both the definition of male and female. It's not possible. You basically have to be almost two people in order to be an actual hermaphrodite. Or you'd have to have some kind of like thing where you're one person, but you have basically the sex organs of two different people. Again, not just, I'm talking about penis and vagina. I'm saying every single aspect of the sex organs, such that you'd be like, but again, it doesn't even work though, because then it's like, it's not just about your sex organs though, because it's also about things like pelvis size. Pelvis size is part of what defines a female as being organized around facilitating the function of the large gamete in sexual reproduction, because one of the functions of the large gamete is being pushed through, or, when the baby's actually made, being pushed through the birth canal. So I guess in order to be a hermaphrodite, you'd have to have two sets of pelvi. I don't know what the plural of pelvis is. Anyway, so yeah, it's just not possible.
Reproduce in some cases, either because they are able to ovulate or have functioning testes, or sometimes even both. In the cases when a true hermaphrodite can produce both large and small gametes.
Okay, so what he's doing here is he's basically saying, sometimes hermaphrodites, so-called, can reproduce. But again, the reason he's doing that is because he's taking this definition of hermaphrodite, which includes, obviously what he's already said in the video is that somebody who's completely biologically male, but just has a bit of ovarian tissue, would be considered an hermaphrodite. Well, yeah, obviously, such a person would be able to reproduce because they're biologically male. Like, this is kind of just defining yourself into being correct. Yes, if you define hermaphrodite to literally include somebody who has the complete sexual function and reproductive function of one specific sex, then that person's obviously going to be able to reproduce, but the point is that's why they're not an hermaphrodite.
People who would otherwise be called members of the male sex or the female sex but happen to be infertile are sexless, which I don't think King Critical would ever accept.
Well, again, it's about phenotype, about organization. Standard, if you get your legs chopped off, you're still a bipedal because of the nature of how your body is designed to walk, not because you necessarily have the ability to walk. I think we all basically know this. It's the kind of classic, if you follow the trans logic to its logical conclusion, you would have to basically get rid of the entire idea of something being broken, right? Because you couldn't talk about a broken fridge, because you'd have to say, well, if the fridge isn't doing the function of a fridge, it's no longer a fridge. Whereas, of course, what a normal person would say is, well, it is performing, or it is a fridge because it should be performing the function of a fridge, but it's broken. Being a hermaphrodite, no matter what, nobody is designed to perform both the functions of biological males and biological females in sexual reproduction in a human being.
Even if in real life situations you have way more information about a person, as long as it excludes knowing their sex as a dynamic in biological reproduction, as you put it, you cannot be certain that they actually are one sex or another.
Okay, I mean, the obvious issue here is the epistemology versus ontology thing. Assuming biological sex is referring specifically to things like genitals, gonads, chromosomes, things like that, we don't witness any of that stuff directly most of the time. because most people wear clothes. But we can often, almost always, tell whether someone's biologically male or biologically female, especially if we're talking about, taking off the cards the idea of people specifically trying to change the way they look through surgery and things like that. It's almost always immediately easy to tell because of the holistic nature of biological sex. Anybody would be able to tell for certain that I am a biological male. Like, it's really difficult for me to imagine anyone thinking, oh, I can't tell. I don't know, yeah. I was going to try and speculate, is there any type of person I can imagine where you wouldn't really be able to tell? But it's pointless, because the main issue here is, even if it was impossible to tell, whether somebody's biologically male or biologically female is still either a true or false claim. It's impossible to tell how many birds are in the sky right now, but I can tell you right now with absolute certainty that the answer to that question will be a number. I can also tell you it'll be more than one, more than two, probably more than 1,000. Definitely more than 1,000. Yeah, I don't really know what the exact number would be, but I know it will be a number. In the exact same sense, even if I couldn't tell what someone's biological sex is, I could still know things about biological sex, know things about how biological sex should be defined, know what would make that person biologically male or female. So yeah, it's just not a good analogy.
When you do accidentally get it wrong, in the cases where the person hasn't told you their gender beforehand, and the person corrects you, what reason would you have for insisting that they are of the gender they're not?
Again, I don't know why he's saying gender, because gender is... I guess so. I guess he's using gender to mean he and she, but the answer is, well, I'm so confused by what he's saying there, because he's like, what reason would you have for insisting they are what they're not? But it's like, well, if I know for a fact that, well, I'm only going to insist if I know what they are, right? So if I know, for some reason, if I did know someone was biologically male, then I would insist they're biologically male. I guess the question he's asking here is if let's take me. If you met me on the street and said, for some reason, this is what you decide to say. You say, hey, you are a man. You are biologically male. I said, actually, no, I'm a biological female. And you were like, no, you're a male. And I'm like, no, I'm biologically female. And yeah, sure. It's weird that a biological female would look like this, but technically speaking, you can't do any of the tests that would absolutely confirm for undeniable certainty that I am biologically male, so I am a biological female. I kind of, but in that situation, I guess the answer is that the reason you would have for insisting someone is biologically male is because it's just really difficult to believe that I would in fact be biologically female, but just happen to look 100% like a biological male. It just that would be the main point. But the main question there is, most of the time, whether someone's male or female, because if someone says they're a trans woman, then that already tells you they're biologically male. They've just told you they're biologically male. But, and again, he's talking about gender here though, so I'm like, well, I wouldn't insist someone's the gender they're not. If someone is masculine, then I'd recognize them as masculine. If someone's feminine, I'd recognize them as feminine. But he was talking about biological sex. And again, I wouldn't insist someone's the biological sex they're not. I don't even understand what his point's supposed to be here.
Do you have some special vision which allows you to see someone's biological sex? Can you smell chromosomes? This is clearly absurd.
Again, to suggest that I can only know someone's biological sex if I can smell chromosomes that's clearly absurd. While, again, yeah, technically speaking, you don't exactly know it for certain. You pretty much do, right? You pretty much do know for certain what somebody actually is, short of very, very rare exceptions. But I guess this question of what actually is knowledge? Is knowledge really 100% certainty? Because then you go down the whole kind of Descartes route, where it's the only thing we know is that we exist, and everything else is who knows? Which is ridiculous. No, obviously in practice, you if you have a pretty good reason to think something is true, you will say that you know it.
Fortunately, this doesn't get him out of the pickle of some trans people going straight under his radar, given that they sufficiently transition.
Like, I don't really know what the point's supposed to be here. Like, I'm fine with the idea that I might not immediately be able to recognize every single trans-identified person. That's not my position. My position is just that a trans-identified person, if is still biologically male or biologically female, regardless of my ability to tell that. There's lots of things that I might not immediately recognize about someone that could still be true. If I was on a jury, I might not recognize whether someone's guilty of a crime, but that doesn't mean that whether or not they committed the crime is based on my ability to tell.
If he wants to take that chance and risk offending some cis men and women, just so he can stick it to some trans people, I guess he's free to do so, but it sounds pretty...
So why would that offend a cis man or cis woman? Sorry, I'm using that term. Why, like, as a biological male, if someone thought I was a biological female, I would be confused. If I was a biological male who looked very androgynous and or effeminate, and actually, like, maybe someone, like, I could imagine someone just based on assumption mistakenly thinking that I'm a female, I would just be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like, yeah, generally, if you look mannish or womanly, more like a biological male, even though you're biologically female, or more like a biological female when you're a biological male, you probably have already reconciled yourself to the reality that people are going to assume wrongly what you are, and I guess you're probably fine with that. So yeah, I don't think that should be offending people.
I think I've made it quite clear, but there will be some differences in how members of the male sex and members of the female sex want to be treated, on average. His charitable take of my position is pretty close to what it actually is, at least in one aspect. My analogy from earlier.
So, okay, the one thing about my charitable definition, which I don't know if I'll include this, but basically the charitable definition was that being treated as a man or woman just means being called a man or woman, is that's circular, which is not what I mentioned at the time, but yeah, it is genuinely circular to say, well, I want to be treated as the way a typical, or basically I'm a woman because I want to be treated the way a typical woman wants to be treated, and the way a typical woman wants to be treated is being called a woman. At that point, you're just saying I'm a woman because I want to be called a woman, which is basically saying I'm a woman because I identify as a woman, which is basically circular.
My analogy from earlier should have made it clear that when you remove biological sex, it's quite ridiculous to say that it also necessarily removes gender. Therefore, this concept of gender should no longer be directly based.
If you remove biological sex, you aren't automatically removing gender. I agree with that.
Based on biological sex, and instead will have to be based on the mental traits of the person in question.
Has he defined gender? Because he seems to be using the term gender to mean the categories of man and woman. But, well, I'm so confused because I never said, because to me gender means feminine and masculine. And I never said, and I don't know anyone who's ever said, that if you removed biological sex, you'd automatically be removing the idea of femininity and masculinity. Because while I think femininity and masculinity do have their origins in the biological sex distinction, if you got rid of them now, people could still be feminine or masculine. But what is the significance of that? I don't understand.
But I'd love to see if anyone from the gender critical side can actually provide other examples of mental traits which allow for gender to exist in an individual without sex.
So we're supposed to be providing examples that allow gender to exist in an individual outside of sex. Like, we're providing an example of that.
Or if they'll be forced into saying that their mom is no longer a woman if she inhabits a robot body.
Or we'll be forced to say our mum's no longer a woman if she inhabits a robot body. But that seems like contradictory because he's saying either we can show that gender exists apart from sex, or we'd have to admit that if someone's detached from their sex, they then lose their womanhood. Am I allowed to just not respond to this? Because it's like, none of that makes any sense, right? Like, none of that means anything. Again, gender, you have three things here. You've got biological sex, being a man or woman, and gender. gender can exist independent of biological sex because a male can be feminine and a female can be feminine. The categories of man and woman, the question is, how does it make sense to define them? Does it make sense to define them with reference to gender, aka femininity and masculinity? No, because that would be incredibly sexist. So what's the other thing? Or, can we define them in a circular way and just say, well, you're a woman if you want to be called a woman? No, because that's circular. How can you meaningfully want to be called something that doesn't have a definition? So no, what's the only thing left? Basically, biological sex. Okay, so we arrive at that. If you suddenly had your biological sex taken away, would you magically cease to be a man or woman? Again, that depends. I've said before that you can argue that the initial referent of whether you're a man or woman is the reason why you should be considered a man, or like the initial referent of your biological sex. But of course, someone could also go the other way and say, no, actually, yeah, you do cease to become a woman if, hypothetically speaking, you somehow were transferred into the body of someone who was not biologically female.
Let's pick out one of the comments. Trans women are biologically female, actually. It's not crazy to say so. It's factually correct. Their gender is female. They are biological creatures. We have the term...
Their gender is female. That's such a stupid thing to say. I mean, I'm not arguing with this tweet, and I'm probably just going to skip over this. This is a guy defending trans people who are arguing that trans women are biologically female. And the example given is their gender is female. Which is, on the surface, how is that not biological essentialism? So in other words, being feminine extends directly from the reality of your biological sex. That is biological essentialism when it comes to gender. One of the things that really annoys me is that people just say nonsense without even thinking through what they're saying. Like, I guarantee this person here would not want to be seen admitting that being a feminine can automatically be conflated with being biologically female. But that's what they're saying when they're saying your gender is female. But they're just not thinking through what they're saying. And that's so annoying and stupid. And it makes this conversation very tiring, because I get so many comments from people that are just like, oh man, did you know that gender and sex are different? It's like, yeah, I do. Do you know that?
Now, using their definitions, what they aren't saying is that trans women are cis women or cis females. They're just saying that both trans...
Sorry, my camera was cut off just there, but and I didn't really notice. But what I like about this is that he was like, so when I said that the definition of an hermaphrodite as being someone with a little bit of ovarian tissue in them if they're biologically male didn't make any sense. He was like, well, that's the scientific argument. That's how scientists define it. So therefore it's automatically correct. And you just need to get over it because that's just the reality of the situation. Like very much not entertaining the idea that I could object fundamentally to that definition. Whereas here, when someone's saying something nonsense, that their gender is female, and basically that trans-identified males are in fact biologically female, he's like, well, that's actually fine because they're just using it in a different sense to mean a different thing. And it's like, no, that's not acceptable. Like, they're still saying something wrong.
And biological female would mean something like a person who wants to be treated like a member of the female sex wants to be treated and inhabits a biological body, as opposed to mechanical or holographic.
What is this? Good, I'm glad we clarified that they don't inhabit a holographic body. This is useful information.
This is a very basic misunderstanding, which King Critical should have been able to pick up on.
The point... Sorry, no, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It's that if someone's saying they're biologically female, I'm not misunderstanding that they're defining female in some stupid way. I'm rejecting the fact that they are defining it in a stupid way. Somebody told me they were from Taiwan, and by that they didn't mean anything relating to their ethnicity or citizenship. Yeah, there we go, that's it, basically. Having these definitions isn't good, because, or saying like, well, I am this thing, but I'm this thing in a fundamentally different sense, because I'm defining it differently. That doesn't help. Yeah, if you tell me you're from Taiwan, but you're not in any meaningful sense from Taiwan, but you just define being from Taiwan in, to mean, I like cheeseburgers. Well, no, that's not what the word Taiwan, that's not being from Taiwan means.
The fact that he thinks the category of women should be describing those of the female sex doesn't mean that people can't and don't use that word differently. To give an analogy, it's like
yeah, people do use the word differently. They're wrong. This is not difficult.
Coming up to me and saying that they're an engineer, and then I tell them that they're lying to me because I know that they work in a lab developing and designing chemical manufacturing processes. I reject that definition of engineer because what I mean is a person who designs and oversees construction and maintenance of building structures.
Yeah, okay, sorry, the difference is that it's not that you have different definitions, it's that you're using or focusing on different aspects of the one correct definition, basically. What would be more analogous here is someone telling you they're an engineer when actually they're, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that would obviously not be an engineer. They're a primary school teacher, and it's because they engineer young minds. But anything even more absurd, it doesn't really matter. The point is, people can just be talking nonsense when they define themselves a particular way.
Clearly, it doesn't matter that my point is that an engineer should self-evidently be defined this way, as the way other people may use it can be different and still not false or wrong. This chemical...
Well, no. If something should, he's saying it doesn't matter if a word should self-evidently be defined a particular way. It does matter, because if it is true that a word should self-evidently be defined a particular way, then the people who are defining it differently are false and wrong. It makes no sense. That's a completely stupid thing to say it doesn't matter. It's like saying it doesn't matter if this food has deadly poison in it, because just because it's got deadly poison in it doesn't mean that if you eat it you'll die. It's like yes it does. That's what the definition of. It's like, do you know what deadly poison is?
Engineer is not any more wrong in using engineer to describe themselves just because I reject that that's how the word should be used. I'd have to provide an argument for why engineer shouldn't be used the way this other person is using it.
Well, yeah, sorry. Are you confused? That's like the whole point of my YouTube channel. Now, you might not think I do a good job at it, maybe, but to be like, hey, King Critical, you idiot, what you're supposed to do is argue against the use of a particular definition. Yeah, I do argue against the idea that the terms man and woman should be defined in a way that completely detaches them from biological sex. Never mind what we're talking about here, which is people saying they're biologically female and detaching that from biological sex, which is even more absurd.
Which King Critical so far hasn't been able to do for words like man and woman. Now onto the...
So, okay, see, this is like a really funny thing here, because most of this video, you'll notice, has not been about the definitions of the word man and woman. We've spoken about like whether or not so-called trans healthcare is actually good for trans people. We've spoken about some other stuff, but we haven't really delved into the question, should the terms man and woman be defined with reference to biological sex, even though that's something I've spoken about before. But to say, well, he hasn't managed to do it, it's so funny to just casually, as an aside in a video, basically deny one of the fundamental things that I've set out to do on this channel and just be like, oh, he hasn't done that. Like, it would be like if there's a channel that talks all about evolution and then a creationist makes a response to them and said, what matters is whether or not evolution is true, which so far this person has failed to provide an answer to. And it's like, well, you can say that, but you can't just say that as an aside when the person you're responding to, one of their main points is talking about that. You've responded to like a handful of my videos, and because he kind of responds to several videos at once, so he's responded to a handful of my videos when my entire channel deals with that topic. You just can't say that, like, especially when you don't have a good argument. Like, your argument is literally just a circular, a woman is someone who wants to be called a woman.
The other parts of the argument. If somebody told me that they're Taiwanese, and all they meant by Taiwanese is that they have traits X, Y, and Z, and they have traits X, Y, and Z, then they're not saying anything false.
Yes, they are. If someone tells you that they're Taiwanese, because when they say Taiwanese, they mean liking cheeseburgers, then they are saying something false. The false thing they're saying is that they're Taiwanese, because they're not Taiwanese. It's like the, how many legs does a dog have if we say that its tail is a leg? The answer is 4. because saying a tail is a leg doesn't make it one. And that's basically the point here. Is someone Taiwanese if we say that being Taiwanese means liking cheeseburgers? The answer is no, because saying being Taiwanese means liking cheeseburgers doesn't make that true.
But to say that the word can only be used the way you specifically define them, or some group defines them, requires an actual argument, which King Critical fails to provide.
I'm sorry, I admit it, guys, I didn't provide an argument for why saying I'm Taiwanese because I like cheeseburgers is not an accurate way of understanding being Taiwanese. I'm really sorry. What a horrendous oversight in my video. I hope that you were still able to get something out of it, but obviously that was a massive, that was just a massive gaping hole in the logic of the video. I didn't specify why actually it would be wrong to define Taiwanese in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with being from or associated with Taiwan in any way. I apologize.
If all you meant by saying that you're 74 years old is that you want to be treated like a 74-year-old, and most of the time you like listening to music which came out 50 to 60 years ago, and that you have views like that of a typical 74-year-old, then...
So yeah, again, it's the classic, how many legs does the dog have if we say its tail is a leg? If you're defining a word incorrectly, then that doesn't affect reality. Technically, logically, that, each premise follows and you end up with the conclusion, yeah, it's true, but you would point out the obvious thing, which is, well, that's not what I'm 74 means. Yeah, basically, this is the, in deductive arguments, an argument can be, what's the word? It can be sound or... I think the distinction is between sound and true. I could be wrong about that. I might just be getting my words wrong. But basically, a sound argument is an argument where the conclusions follow from the premises. So, for example, and I think this is from Doctor Who, all elephants are pink, Nelly is an elephant, therefore elephants are pink. Therefore Nelly is pink. That is a sound argument. The conclusions follow, or the conclusion follows entirely from the premise. However, it's not a correct argument because, in fact, elephants aren't pink. So, there we go. That's just an important thing. Just because something is sound does not mean it's true. Just because something follows from the premises doesn't mean that it's true.
King Critical just appeals to, well, that's not how I define being 74, so somebody else can't be using it this way.
Again, we're back to the fucking Taiwanese thing, right? Yeah, sorry, I'm not getting out my logical argument for why wanting to be 74 doesn't make you 74. I just, this is really funny when you imagine the reverse, someone trying to show up at a, a children's, a preschool or something, some creepy old man. I identify as a 6-year-old. Oh, sorry, okay, well, in that case, let me bust out my argument for why that's wrong. No. I mean, look, I could make an argument for why that's wrong, but it's not that surprising, really, and not really worth drawing attention to that I didn't make the argument. The reason I didn't make the argument is because you would think I shouldn't need to. It seems very ridiculous to be like, well, King Critical's making this objection, but he hasn't actually proven that it is wrong to say that wanting to be 74 means you're 74. Okay, it's a good thing we are talking about 74, because if we're talking about identifying as younger, this would be some... real pedo logic.
If people in the field of philosophy try to define knowledge, and their definition of knowledge is something very specific and different to what people usually mean by knowledge, is the philosopher's definition going to be wrong because that's not what knowledge means according to some lay person or people?
Okay, you know what, so we're probably done with the video now, but I'm happy to report we've made a decent amount of progress. We're still not halfway through the video. But, I don't know. I feel like we made some progress, maybe. So the question here is, well, if a philosopher defines something a particular way, is that wrong because people disagree with it? No. But here's the thing. Okay, think about this for a second. Do you know what he said there? He said, if a philosopher who's their whole point is defining terms, well, not the whole point, but one big thing they're going to do is define terms, disagrees with a layperson's definition, is that likely to be wrong? And the answer is, no, it's not likely to be wrong. But that's not equivalent to somebody just saying that they're 74 because they feel like they're 74. Like, yeah, if somebody's a super expert in the concept of aging and they define age a particular way, and then someone else is just like a random person, then I guess we should, I mean, you know, you still shouldn't just take something on someone's authority, but we could look into, is what they're saying actually correct about, you know, the way they're defining age? But that's not what we're dealing with here. For the record, I think that in some ways there's plenty of concepts I define. I think the way I define biological sex is different from the way that a average person would define it. So yeah, I'm not objecting to the idea that we can define words in ways that are different to how the average person might define it, and those definitions might need to be explained and interrogated to see whether or not they make sense. The point I'm making is that just saying I'm 74 because I want to be 74 is on the surface level nonsense, and I thought it was clear enough it was obviously nonsense that it would serve as a good example of how it is nonsense, but clearly this guy disagrees. So look forward to next time where I explain in elaborate detail why saying that you are 24 just because you want to be 24 isn't accurate. Anyway, we'll end the video now. I guess I'll just end it really, really quickly because, you know, I'm at the end of my recording session. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I don't know. Yeah, I thought this was a productive recording session. I did feel like we're actually making some pretty good pace. Maybe it's just because we were making some good pace, but also if you look at the chapter things, you can see a lot of individual arguments were covered here. So maybe we were going through a lot of arguments, but the video kind of felt like we were progressing faster. Like the fact we're going through so many arguments made it feel like we were progressing quite quickly, but obviously we actually, I think, got through more of the video last week, so whatever. We'll see. Next, so on Thursday, I'll probably upload another video where I say, hey, or upload another poll where I say, hey guys, you know, do you want me to continue? If not, do you have any other ideas? And we'll see what you think. But yeah, I hope you did enjoy this, and I will see you next week.